Welcome to the BXG Podcast, the podcast where pop culture and nerd culture meet.
You think it's just going to be barbecue sauce?
Because if you actually read those books, it's just gobbledygook.
I really think clothes should be mandatory.
Speaking of Star Wars,
Captain America.
trailer reaction video. Sounds like a sinus infection in there at some point.
Yeah.
Look for the Light, episode 9. It is worth discussing some of the ancillary characters. Anna is the name of the character, as we see at the beginning. She is played by Ashley Johnson, who is most famous for being the voice of Ellie in the game. And it's funny because when you hear Troy Baker as James in the previous episode, he doesn't sound like Joel, but she sounds like Ellie from the game. And that's the thing of Troy Baker being kind of like a man of 1,000 faces, with his ability and range to do so many different voices. And then I just think we haven't seen her in quite a while, since the first episode. Merle Dandridge is reintroduced as Marlene. The episode is written for TV by Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, directed by Ali Abbasi, who also directed episode 8. And we'll talk about the season as a whole, and we'll talk about looking ahead to future seasons. But spoiler free, because we always start with spoiler free.
We do.
In case somebody hasn't seen the episode yet, and they just want to check out our initial thoughts and then come back later. That's why we always start out spoiler free. And then there's a siren and a notification, and it's time stamped, and that's when we go into spoilers. I just want to clarify this. Some people don't, understand the process, which is fine. What did you think of the final episode, which was actually a little bit shorter, on the shorter side compared to some of the rest of the episodes? But spoiler free, what did you think of episode 9, Look for the Light?
I mean, my first thought was just the length of the episode was like kind of shocking. I definitely, not that I'm like, it needs to be an hour. It didn't need to be anything other than, I think, what it was. I just still was kind of shocked to see that, because I think most of the time a lot of these shows think that the last episode has to be long because we got to get to everything. And it's like, it felt like they got to everything they wanted to get to without having to do any extraneous things. I thought that the beginning where we get to see, Ellie being brought into the world was really interesting, and how maybe, how she maybe has the immunity, that idea. And then also, the middle was definitely just, the middle where all the action happens. And then I don't want to say like I saw the end coming, but I just kind of figured that the end would have that kind of twist to it, just because there's another game and another season of this show. But it does bring in the idea, without spoiling it, is like, I'm sure you think about this when you're playing the game too, about morality and what it actually means to do
we'll get
one
that
thing. And I thought the episode was good. I did not think it was great. I didn't think it was a great episode. I did think it was good. I did feel like this was probably, it felt more video game-ish, and I don't mean that negatively. It just felt more of like how a video game plays out, more than probably, I think, any other episode at this point. And that could be a positive, and it could be a negative. But I definitely had that feeling where I read that it was exactly the same length as the video game thing. I heard it plays out almost the exact amount of time. Like, not exactly, but pretty close, which I thought was interesting. I forget where I read that.
No, that's not accurate.
Okay, I don't know.
That's not accurate at all, actually.
Okay.
Um,
I just read it.
yeah, no, I'm not saying that you're the one that's saying that. I'm saying that whoever wrote
Right.
that doesn't know what they're talking about.
Okay.
Um,
Can't remember where I read that. That'll bug me now.
but, and I can kind of, I don't think it's a spoiler for the show. There's like, there's a whole section, and actually, yeah, I will wait. I will wait because there are some mild spoilers in kind of that explanation. But you are right. I agree with you that this episode was good, not great. And I think that the previous episode was the best episode of the season. I think that episode 8 was the best episode. And that kind of happens a lot, I feel like,
Yeah.
especially with HBO shows where it's the penultimate episode seems to be the episode that is really the barn burner. I thought that this episode was maybe a little rushed, which was, well, I'll be honest with you. When I turned it on, I saw 43 minutes was the runtime, and that in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, there's usually, there's a minute and a half of credits, and then there's like a 5 minute making of the episode afterwards. Well, there ended up being no making of the episode. So that kind of extended it a little bit longer. But as the clock's ticking through the opening sequence, I'm thinking to myself, they are really going to be pushing time here. Because that opening sequence was a good 5 to 7 minutes. And when you're dealing with only 43 minutes, now you're down to 35 minutes, and there's a lot to cram into 35 minutes in a way that you have to hit the emotional weight, tie up loose ends, have your action set pieces, and then kind of conclude things. And so I thought the episode was maybe a little bit rushed. It could have benefited from a few more minutes. I'm not saying we needed another full like 10 minutes, but I really feel like another 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, maybe would have slowed the tempo down in this a little bit. And I think that that was necessary. And honestly, I think that the way that this plays out in the game would have worked better than maybe they would have given it credit for when they were writing this out and chose to make the changes that they made. But I mean, in the end, it still worked out. I just feel like it kind of lost a little bit of the panache from the game. It didn't have maybe the emotional weight. There's a particular thing that happens that did not happen in episode 6, and then it didn't happen again in this episode. And I think that there's very much emotional weight behind the two things that didn't happen that are in the game that are not in the show, and I'll talk about them in spoilers. But I think that that would have maybe packed a harder punch than the route that they went. But with that being said, in the end, I thought that I thought it was well done. There's nothing, I'm not sitting here saying it's bad or that it was bad, but I just feel as though it could have been maybe a little bit better if they would have lengthened things out. And I'm a little bit curious. I thought that they might take a few minutes and introduce a specific character who's more important to the second game than the first game and give that character maybe a little bit of backstory, but they chose not to do that, which is fine because it wasn't really in the first game to begin with. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I thought that they pulled it off pretty well. I think that's fair to say.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Um,
And there's a certain level that we expected from this show, and this was just a slight dip.
well,
I'm not saying like a big, it's just literally like going maybe a half step down.
yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I guess with that being said, we can just get into the spoilers. Before we hit the big questions, I think I will just pause to kind of shoot holes all through that claim that whoever made that this was like blow by blow the same as the finale. I think that they're leaving out a really important part, which is when they get to Salt Lake, they have to go through like an access tunnel that is full of infected. And this is one consistent thing that I've seen that was a complaint about the show, that they're already saying for season 2 there's going to be way more infected, but there just wasn't that much. There wasn't that many instances of infected. And I was erring on the side of less is more and scarcity builds tension. But I do kind of think that they skimped a little bit on some of the infected and the encounters that you have with them and just how terrifying they can be. And there is a section in the game when you get into the city, they're going down that highway, she's sitting on the truck. And I feel like one of the ways that they did this kind of took away from the last episode. And what I mean by that is the flashback scene with her mother running through the woods and then giving birth, and this is how she's immune. Spelling all that out. That is a scene that is not in the game. And I think that the rest, well, let me get your perspective on this. The rest of the way where she seems kind of distant, to me, it felt like she was almost dwelling on that. Like, oh man, my mom sacrificed, and now here I am, and I'm sad.
Right.
What was your take on that?
I think it was that. I think it was a little bit of that. I think it was also this, maybe the thinking of what is going to happen to me kind of thing too. Like once we get to where we're going, what happens to me? I think it's looking back while looking forward, where you take of like something happened to someone you know, and then you're heading to something new and different. And so, yeah, I think it was a little combination of both, of like looking forward and looking back, and both making you sad because you don't know. You just don't know.
The way that I have always interpreted that through the game is they arrive in Salt Lake. She's distant. Part of it's because she knows she's about to... This whole trip is either going to be worth something or worth nothing. Right. But I think it's also... I think that particular... The way that they worked that kind of stole from the fact that in the previous episode, she fucking killed a guy with a cleaver.
Yeah.
And the way that I always interpreted that in the game was a little bit of, oh shit, I really did that, tied to what's going to happen. That particular thing that I went through and everything else that we went through on this journey can't be for nothing. And I think that having the scene with her mom at the beginning and showing how that all came to be kind of stole away from that a little bit. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. I can see that.
My interpretation of the scenes. But they go down through, and they have to go through this tunnel of infected, and you have to kill all these infected, and then they're making their way through. And this happens after the giraffes and the tents where they're like kind of looking through. There's like the tents that was the army thing, the medical tents that were set up. They go down into this like tunnel and they fight through all these infected, and then they get into water, and Ellie can't swim. And that's not something that was really, it was mentioned early on in the series, but it was never like a point to go back to with the series, where it is a constant kind of point in the game. Ellie can't swim, and that's part of the puzzle solving process, is you have to sometimes figure out ways for her to get across bodies of water. And so then she's swept away, and Joel has to go in after her, and they wash up, and then that's when the people grab them and crack him in the head with the rifle. There's not like the whole thing where they throw a flashbang, and that's how they get them, or like a smoke grenade or whatever. And so that part of it plays out much, much, much longer than, and the reality of it too is even the sequence in the hospital after he is told like she's not going to survive. Like and this is the cure, and this is what she would want. We didn't really give her a choice, and we're not giving you a choice. This is just what has to happen. And he says, well, I do have a choice, and I'm going to make my choice. And he just goes fucking Rambo through this place. Like, even that takes, it's more drawn out.
Sure.
And it's more gamified, honestly. And it is a game. So, and that's why it's kind of funny to hear you say, like, this played more like a video, or this watched more like a video game, where it's like, yeah, kind of, but also no, because in this, him beating up these guys and making it to where she's at takes 90 seconds, and when you're playing the game it takes 15 minutes. Into that though, I guess we can talk about the end, talk about maybe some of the emotional pieces that led up to the end, but first we got to pay some ads. We got to pay some bills. We don't pay the ads.
Yeah.
We do the ads to pay the bills. And
that's right.
This week, The Last of Us, HBO's The Last of Us review series is brought to you by Clovers. This is a styrofoam one, but if you're lucky, you can find them in your backyard or, under a rainbow with a pot of gold. Happy
That's right.
St. Patrick's Day. Is that tomorrow, I think?
It's Friday.
This coming up?
Yeah, this Friday.
Is it always on
March
Friday?
17th. It's always on March 17th.
Oh, I thought it was on March 14th for some reason.
March 17th. Tomorrow's Pie Day.
Yes, it is. So you have yourself a pie.
Yeah.
I can't say that I won't, but I also can't say that I will.
I probably won't have any pie, unfortunately.
So how do you want to approach this? Do you want to talk about straight to the ending, or do you want to talk about some of the emotional beats? I got my Macho Man thing going on here.
I would say maybe the emotional beats, and then we can really just wrap it up with the actual ending, and then
of the Macho Man.
Of the Macho Man. Oh yeah.
So there was
often he actually said yeah.
Yeah, like at the end of
every sentence. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Excuse me. So I think there was a couple. Obviously, we touched on the situation, the opening of the show, where Ashley Johnson, who plays Ellie's mother in the show, is pregnant, running through the woods, has the baby, lies and says that she cut the umbilical cord before she was bit. I think that particular scene probably requires a little bit of suspension of disbelief. Just all the way, by the way, and I meant to mention this, Ashley Johnson is the girl from the original 2012 Marvel's Avengers that says, Captain America saved me.
That's cool.
So that's her. In like the post credits or whatever. I feel like that scene there's got to be a little bit of I've been in the room for the process of two birthings. Like, it just doesn't, you don't just get into a fist fight and a baby's born. There's a little bit more to it than that. I can confirm.
Sure.
But that scene kind of maybe, well, not kind of maybe, but explaining why Ellie has this immunity, which is never explained in the games, why she is that way. It's kind of hinted at, but it's never fully explained. What did you think of that particularly? Did that do anything for you, or I felt like they stayed a little bit too long there.
That's what I was going to say, is I thought they went a little long on it. I also just don't think it was needed.
That's what she said.
I don't think knowing how she's immune really added anything to me. Honestly, I just don't. I think it was just, it's like a lot of times where like you're kind of just thrown into something, and I what happens is you start to take away a little bit from that when you, because there is that. I mean, if you start getting into all the science of something like this
Yeah, sure.
show,
Right.
then the more you get into it, the easier you can pick it apart. And if you never do anything, then there's nothing you can really pick apart because we just don't know. But when you go into something like this, I think it made it, obviously I'm not going to say anything like on the science of it, but it just makes it a little easier to pick apart. And I will agree, it was a little long. It fell a little long in the tooth when there was other things that could have been. Yeah. I think it could have been something that, like you said, the 2 to 3 minutes extra, maybe just take away a little bit from this and add to something else.
Right.
Like a giraffe.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, actually. The giraffe scene, very famous scene from the game. It was one of 2 scenes that there was an NDA on. When reviewers dropped their reviews after the embargo, they were not allowed to, in their reviews, put the giraffe scene and also the scene from the very beginning where Sarah is killed. So what was what did that kind of do for you in this episode where she, he gives her the boost up and then she kind of takes off. Oh, you got to see this. And it's, this giraffe, and then subsequently almost like a herd of giraffes.
I thought it was nice to see like color.
Mm.
There was something to be said about that, and the light at the end of the tunnel, something good. I mean, it kind of gives you this false idea of maybe there is something good that's going to happen, in this game and this TV show of dread, of essentially constant dread with a little bit of humor mixed in just to kind of take you a little bit off. And then now we actually have color, and color is so much more, it means more. Like color, like the literally, Wizard of Oz changed his color, and it's that idea of things like that where when there's a change of color, it means something different. And so I thought for me it was like, ooh, color, giraffes. I guess they used a real giraffe too, which is cool.
It was a real giraffe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I thought that was a nice little bit of levity considering what was going to follow. So
Right.
For me, I thought it was cool. I thought it was a cool moment. It was just enough. That was a scene where, like I said, it could have been actually. I actually don't think it should have been. I thought it was just the right amount because the show is still about dread, existential dread, and sadness. Yeah. And so to have that little bit of happiness in a different way, where it isn't just a pun or it isn't just something like that. It was just actual what it's the idea. It's like when you go to the zoo, like you never have a bad day at a zoo, or like that idea of going to like Disneyland where you can be, and it's that idea. It was like that version of going to a Disneyland park, and as crappy as you might feel going in, at least you had that moment of time.
Which we will be in Disneyland together.
We will.
So meet and greet for all the BXG fans out there.
It'd be fun. We'll put it up. I'll be by Cinderella's castle.
You won't, because that's Sleeping Beauty's castle.
I know.
Cinderella's is in
Florida.
It's in
Florida. I always get that confused. It always throws me off that it isn't Cinderella's castle.
In Disneyland? What's a different castle each place?
Right. But it just throws me off.
Well,
I've been there twice, and I'm always like, Cinderella's castle. I know it isn't, but yeah.
That's another conversation.
Right. Another conversation.
I think the real last piece before we get into kind of how things shake out. They're sitting together around these tents, and she's asking him about what they are, and he's explaining that they're these like medical survivor tents or camps or whatever that they set up for people who weren't infected. And he was in one, and he kind of divulges that he tried to kill himself, and he flinched, and he kept going, and eventually he winds up with her and feels like she's what really finally brought him back after Sarah's death. What did you think of that? And then I'm going to tell you kind of how that unfolds in the game, to where I actually think it's a great case of less of more, and it carries more weight than what they kind of attempted at the within the show.
So it's funny that you said that. Uh, I thought it was almost a little too much like, I care. I do think that. And a lot of what this show's done really well up until that point was not having that of I care. It's more of like, I care because I kind of like have to, because I have this mission. And now it was like, you're my, adopted daughter. I have to care now kind of mentality. And I thought, for me, it was just, and I'm saying this, and it sounds like I'm being so negative. It just wasn't what this show had been up to this point, and that just kind of threw me off. It was a little bit thrown at you in a way that I didn't see coming. I always thought it would just be, with the ending of this episode, I definitely thought that maybe was kind of not predictable necessarily, like I said, but something that didn't shock me. But the idea that he's almost so emotional at this point did definitely throw me a little.
I disagree with you a little bit there,
Okay.
especially on your take that it was I care about you, but only because I have this mission. Because he could have bounced at any time,
Sure.
and I think that especially after he reaches Jackson, or after they reach Jackson, and that moment that they have in the bedroom, episode 6, where she talks about, I don't want to go with anyone else because I would just be more afraid. And he breaks down and says, you're not my daughter, and all of these things. And then he kind of begrudgingly moves on. And then they go through the whole scenario where he gets stabbed and she has to save him. And then he has to go find her. And so, yeah, I think that that's maybe a little bit off base. But I think they just do a better job in the game where it's more subtle. In that same time period where they're in Jackson or around Jackson, you're never actually in Jackson, and The Last of Us Part 1. Tommy gives him a picture of Joel and Sarah and says, I went back home, and I thought you might like to have this. And he says, no, I'm good. I don't want it. And then
Right.
I don't remember exactly how, but Ellie gets a hold of the picture, and they're walking through these tents, and she says to him, I want you to have this. I know you said no to Tommy, but I want you to have this. And so he takes it. And then it's just kind of like all the words that had to be said on screen are just kind of left unsaid. And so I think that there was the more subtle approach that works a little bit better for me personally. I know that a couple of people I talked to said that they really liked that moment, which is fine. I mean,
Sure.
But that kind of leads us into the final action sequence where they get hit with a flashbang. They take Ellie. Joel wakes up. Marlene's there and explains to him, we have a chance. The doctor thinks that he might be able to develop a cure from why she's immune. And Joel realizes, well, it's in the brain, so she's going to have to die for this procedure to go through. And he makes the decision that she's more important to him than the rest of the world, essentially.
Right.
And he goes on he goes on a rampage, and he cuts through, and he goes into the operating room. He blasts the doctor in the head, and he scoops her up, hauls her out. There's a final confrontation with Marlene. He ends up basically executing her, and then drives off, and then proceeds to lie pretty heavily to Ellie. Says that there's more kids, there's more people who are immune. They've basically given up, and so we're going home, back to Wyoming. And then we get to the end, and she says, "Is everything swear to me that everything that you told me about the Fireflies is true. And he says, I swear. And that's it. The end.
That's it. That was interesting. Yeah, it was. I thought about like how that kind of goes more into like whatever the relationship is in the next season of like, is this something that maybe it's not necessarily, she's not as trusting. Like there's that little bit where she kind of understands that maybe he's lying a little bit, but it was also the understanding that he's lying to protect her. Sort of that's an interesting take. I don't know if that's the right
We can
idea
talk
or anything,
about
but
season 2
right. But I
in
thought
a
it was
little bit.
interesting that he lied. I definitely didn't expect. I don't know if I expected him to lie or he would just like, since he already talked about being emotional, that he could just say, I knew what had to happen and I wasn't ready for that or something.
So I think a few questions have to be asked. And this is what makes the ending of this game so not controversial or divisive, but there's been a lot of debate over it in the 10 years since its release. And so I will ask you the two questions that some of the other people that I've talked to, that I've asked them. Number one, do you think it would have worked? And number two, if you were in that position, if you were in Joel's position, what would you have done?
No, I don't think it would have worked. And I feel like, yes, I would have done what Joel did. I think there's that connection that you have where, like, imagine if it doesn't work, he loses her, humanity's still the same, and like he could have not had that happen. And I think he kind of realized this wasn't going to work. I think there was that point where he just at any shred of doubt of it not working crept in, and he's like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. So I think for me, it's hard to say because it's like it is humanity, but I also just feel like we don't know if it works, and that if there's any shred of doubt of it not working, then that becomes a problem, obviously.
So they've never. No, I'm trying to see. I'm trying to see. I know that it's been said that I know somewhere along the line Neil Druckmann said that he believes it would have worked. The creator of the game believes it would have. But he's also only one half of the creative team, so maybe it wouldn't have. So I guess that's not a definitive answer. But I think that over time, my answer to that question, the second question, has changed.
Okay.
And I think that in part it has changed because when I played the game originally, I didn't have any kids.
Sure.
And I was like, you are handed the keys to saving humanity, and you're just going to be selfish. And I think that you said towards the beginning, like, this brings into morality and, you know, gray areas and things like that. But the question kind of being, what is the right thing to do? And I think the right thing to do is you have to give it a shot.
Sure.
But now having children, my answer has changed to you save your children because they're all you have in this world.
Right.
What are you fucking voting again? What are you doing? Taking notes?
No, I'm taking notes.
Oh.
I'm actually taking notes. Yeah.
Okay. What? I'm interested. My interest has peaked.
It's honestly just like little things that we hit on that I like want to make sure that I like refresh myself back to when we get into the second season. It's literally like because
Well, let's get into the second season. What are your okay? Get into the second season. I'm trying to figure out what I can tell you that won't they've already talked about this. So a couple things. Number one, they confirmed that the second game will be at least 2 seasons. And I've said that all along. There's enough game there for there to be multiple seasons of television. There's a pretty substantial time jump. I can't remember if it's 5 or 7 years between the two games. I think it's 7.
Really? I did not know that at all.
Yeah. No, that's accurate. It is 7 because she's supposed to be 12 in the game, in the first game, and then in the show she's 14. So I think maybe what'll likely happen is that the time jump will be like 5 years instead of 7. I think she'll still end up being 19. But they've said that they're not going to recast despite the time jump. They said that the only way that they wouldn't work with Bella Ramsey is if Bella Ramsey wanted to quit. With that being said, it's a much different tone, and the objective of the game is much more raw, I think, is the right word. And I'm trying not to give anything away. But this game's about their love, right? It's about their love. The relationship grows. Originally, she's just cargo. And by the end of it, they are surrogate father-daughter. And I think that the second game, and the objective in the first game is very much, we have to get you to this point. And the second game is just a straight up revenge mission.
Okay.
And so it's less about love and more about hate. And that's something that they said when they were making the second game. The first game's about love, the second game's about hate. And it's important in that way to know this, because I saw the meme that's been going around from The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, where it's like the Nick Cage slow look over, and then Pedro Pascal's just doing like the crazy laugh, and one of it said, one of them said, so the Nick Cage face was, TV fans hurt by the first season, and then it cuts to Pedro Pascal's, and it says, people who know what happens in the game.
That's funny.
Because I'm going to tell you, I think it's one of these things where it's got to get better before it gets, it's got to get worse before it gets better.
Right.
And it's always darkest before the dawn. And I'm very curious to see how they stretch this, because there's some pretty traumatic moments in this game, and how they will unfold is going to probably leave a lot of people shocked. Now, part of the thing is, like, the source material is out there, so if people are like really interested in wanting to spoil this for themselves about what's going to happen in season 2 and beyond,
they can.
Just go play the game, or read about it, whatever. So, I mean, do you have any predictions or any guesses or any inclinations?
I mean, I will say my prediction just maybe for the show is like definitely like more violent, and they announced that there's going to be more clickers, so I'm not going to like say that as a prediction. That's just what's going to happen. But I definitely expect it to be more violent. I expect it to be a little bit of an edge of Ellie, like kind of being a little bit more not as trusting as Joel, like having an idea that maybe, he was kind of lying without any proof yet. And I think there might be a point in that where he does come forward and say, guess what? Like, And I think that could be like a point of contention where she's like, you could have saved humanity and you decided to do this. And he's like, well, I was trying to save you. And it was just, I think that, and then she's like, well, what were you saving me for? To keep me, So I think there could be something on this, a realm of like, not a complete falling out, but definitely an idea of distrust.
Yeah. I will not I can neither confirm nor deny,
Right.
obviously. I will say that someone rather important met their untimely demise in the finale. I'm not going to say who.
Okay.
And you'll just get to experience that the same way that you get to experience it the way the rest of us did here a few years ago. Now, season 1 as a whole. Well, let me check and see what time we got here. Yeah, I think we can make it.
I think it's just one of those things where the show was great. I mean, a show that will be nominated for, if not win the Emmy for best show, best drama, certainly acting, acting nominees, things like that. I think what will hurt it is not on my end, but just for some people is that it is based off a video game. And so there will be people still doing that, even, unfounded, but just watching the show. It was a great show. So I think it was really good. I think that sometimes when you have an ending where it wasn't as good and it didn't hold up as well, that it's like leaves a semi-sour taste in people's mouths. But not this show was so good that I think even with the ending not being like the best, it could be like the best episode or anything like that. It's still this show overall was just so good that I think whatever it ends up getting nominated for, it certainly deserves to win. I mean, yeah, we have some TV shows out there, but it's going to take a lot from these other TV shows to, I think, I shouldn't say take it. It'll take the best of what of those other shows that are coming out. It'll take their best effort to beat something like this, especially since you have I think there is this part too where like Pedro Pascal is so likable, and that helps with things. I think that really helps. So I think for me, it's just a really, really good show. One of the better first seasons of television in a really, really long time, for sure. Definitely better than I expected. 100% better than not 100%, but it was definitely better than I expected. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did, to be flat out honest.
Yeah, I think the last episode is, I think it's an 8. And the thing about that is that there's so many episodes in this series that were 9s or 10s that even though an 8 is a really good score, it's still a step down from. I think that there's really, I think the first episode, I think the third episode, which is the Bill and Frank episode, I think the 6th episode, I think the 8th episode are all 10s. And then I think that
I would agree.
I think that the episode with episode 5 with Sam and Henry is a solid 9. I think that the second episode is probably a solid 9 with Tess. I don't think there's any weak points. And I think that, like you said, and that these other things are going to have to bring their A game. And we know that when you nominate, okay, you're going to nominate an episode, you're going to nominate a scene for an actor, you're going to nominate, a piece, a truncated piece. And we've talked about like, oh, that's the Emmy scene. That's the Emmy scene. That's the Emmy episode. And I think the fact that there's so many to choose from speaks to the quality of this. I don't think that this is based on a video game is going to hold it back. Because Game of Thrones won so many based on a fantasy novel. Lord of the Rings won Oscars based on a 90-year-old fantasy novel. Maybe not 90, but I think that stigma is, I think that this show erased that stigma. And honestly, some of the shows that have come before it, if you really want to get into the weeds with things like The Witcher and the Castlevania anime series for two examples. But I think that stigma is gone now. And if it's a good story and if there's good people behind it and there's good actors involved and there's people who know what they're doing, then it's going to be great. And I mentioned this on our last review that this could just be the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
For what's coming behind it. And certainly we'll see when those particular stories get told. But yeah, I think that looking back, we will look back at this episode as being, as you said, one of the great first seasons of anything, but knowing the story, the actors, who's involved, the production team, Sony side of it, I do heartfully believe that when it's all said and done and the dust is cleared and, you know, the final period has been written and the final piece of film has been clipped and left on the cutting room floor, that we could be looking at a very seminal piece of television from
Sure,
tip to tail.
it wouldn't shock me.
But what would you give, just as a number grade, season 1?
Well, I graded every episode, and I threw out the high and the lowest.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up
throughout the highest and lowest.
The high, A10 episode and this last episode, which I scored as an 8.
Okay.
And I got 9.025, so 9 is what I ended up giving this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would probably trend a little bit higher than that, maybe like a 9.25 or a 9.5. But yeah, I think that's well within the realm of, you know, a good score. It's a lot of The Last of Us. We're sad to see it go.
I wonder just the history of. I should have done this at some point. Maybe this is how I always do: is just keep track of every score. This is the first time I've done that. Yeah, I wonder how many shows I would have ever given a 9 in the history of my life as a season.
None from Lord of the Rings.
No, Seinfeld would have probably done that, but I can't think of many other shows that could have done a 9 for an entire season.
Yeah. All right, Mandalorian. Let's move on.
Let's do it.